All right, so get ready because today we're going deep into a story about police corruption in Baltimore.
Yeah, one that really rocked the city.
Exactly, and specifically, we're talking about the Baltimore Police Department's Gun Trace Task Force.
A unit that was supposed to be elite, you know, taking down the worst of the worst.
Yeah, and instead they became the criminals themselves.
It's a wild story, and we're going to break it all down based on the Broken Boundaries episode from the American Scandal podcast.
So get this, the story starts in 2015.
With what seems like a pretty routine drug investigation.
Yeah, just outside of Baltimore in Harford County.
Right, you've got this Corporal David McDougal, who's trying to bust up this heroin ring.
Focusing on a dealer named Aaron Anderson.
And they put a GPS tracker on Anderson's car.
Standard procedure.
Exactly. But here's where things get interesting.
They bring Anderson in for questioning.
And they find another tracker on his car.
Wait a second, 2 trackers?
Yeah, you're not going to believe this, but the second tracker wasn't from some rival gang or anything.
Who was it from then?
It was from a Baltimore detective.
No way.
Yeah, a member of the Gun Trace Task Force named John Clue.
Hold on, so a cop is putting trackers on suspected criminals without authorization?
Well, they can use trackers, but they're very strict protocols.
And Clue didn't follow them.
Nope, which is what caught the FBI's attention.
I can't imagine what was going through McDougal's mind when he found that second tracker.
Talk about a red flag.
Yeah, like you find a secret room in your house that you never knew about.
Exactly, and this tiny little violation ends up sparking a huge FBI investigation.
Called Operation Broken Boundaries.
Led by Agent Erica Jensen.
And Agent Jensen just so happens to have a ton of experience with both gangs and public corruption cases.
Which is kind of perfect for this situation, right?
Talk about the right person at the right time.
You know what they say, where there's smoke, there's fire?
And the FBI starts zeroing in on 2 other detectives on the Gun Trace Task Force.
Mamadou Gondo and Jamal Ray.
Turns out they had ties to the drug trade in Harford County.
The same county where that initial investigation with McDougal started.
Talk about a coincidence.
Well, it wasn't initially about the Gun Trace Task Force at all.
Really?
Yeah, these connections, they just kind of popped up.
And the FBI gets their big break while listening to a wiretap.
On a major drug kingpin named Antonio Shropshire Jr.
And they hear Gondo doing what?
Giving Shropshire advice about a police tracker on his car.
So not only is he dirty, he's dumb.
You can almost hear the FBI agents celebrating in the background.
I bet Gondo felt sick to his stomach when he realized
A little too late.
that Shropshire's phone was probably tapped.
The walls are closing in.
And that wiretap becomes like a gold mine for the FBI.
It starts revealing all these shady things that Gondo and the Gun Trace Task Force were up to.
Like, for example, this guy, Nicholas DeForge.
Yeah, he gets arrested by the task force.
The report says they saw him put a gun in his backpack.
But the wiretap tells a different story.
They had an informant.
Right. But the tip about the gun was wrong.
So they made up the whole thing
Pretty much.
to cover their tracks.
It's scary to think about what could have happened if they hadn't caught Gondo on that wiretap.
Like, how many other innocent people were put away based on lies?
And it gets worse. DeForge said $1,500 went missing after his arrest.
Money that the police never reported.
Makes you think they were just pocketing it.
So the FBI tries to set up a sting operation.
Planting a motorhome full of cash?
Seems like the perfect trap.
But Agent Jensen? She calls it off.
Why?
She realized it was too risky.
How?
These officers, they knew how to play the game.
They could have easily sensed a setup,
And then acted by the book just to avoid getting caught.
making it way harder to prosecute them.
Exactly. It's like they were always one step ahead.
That's when a new task force leader enters the picture.
Sergeant Wayne Jenkins.
And get this, Agent Jensen had actually met Jenkins before.
She even considered using him as an informant.
Oh, the irony.
It gets even crazier, though.
How?
Gondo's wiretap reveals that Jenkins was even dirtier than they thought.
Way dirty.
Yeah, we're talking robbing drug dealers kind of dirty.
Seriously?
Yeah, one of his former colleagues, Detective Maurice Ward, spills the beans.
He tells them about how Jenkins robbed this dealer named Oris Stevenson.
Talk about a tangled web.
So now the FBI has this huge mess on their hands.
A race against time to gather enough evidence before the task force completely falls apart.
Because they were starting to get reassigned.
Exactly. But there's another problem.
What's that?
No one wants to talk.
The victims are too scared to testify.
They're afraid of what might happen to them.
Or they're worried about breaking the no snitching code.
It's a tough situation.
That's where this defense attorney comes in.
Ivan Bass.
He had represented a lot of Jenkins victims.
He believed in the system, but he also knew it was flawed.
And he takes on the challenge of convincing Oris Stevenson to testify,
The dealer that Jenkins robbed.
which wasn't easy.
Stevenson was hesitant at first.
He didn't want to be labeled a snitch.
It's a powerful label in those circles,
But Bates manages to persuade him.
along with other victims.
And their testimonies are crucial.
They give the FBI the first-hand accounts they need.
And finally, they get indictments against all 7 members of the gun trace task force.
On charges of conspiracy, extortion, and robbery,
The whole thing sends shockwaves through the Baltimore Police Department.
Commissioner Kevin Davis, he's stunned.
He can't believe this was happening right under his nose.
And for years.
But there's a silver lining.
What's that?
Some Baltimore PD officers actually helped the FBI with the investigation.
Showing that there were still some good cops out there.
Yeah, but the damage was done.
Absolutely. This wasn't just a few bad apples.
This was a systemic problem.
And now they had to figure out how to arrest these officers.
Safely.
These guys were armed and trained.
And they could have easily gotten desperate.
They had to be extremely careful.
So how did they do it?
They came up with this elaborate plan.
A fake meeting?
They told the task force that there was a mandatory meeting,
At this warehouse in West Baltimore,
and they scheduled it for early in the morning.
when the officers would be less likely to talk to each other.
Minimize the risk of someone finding out.
So they show up expecting a boring meeting.
And bam, the FBI is waiting for them.
What was the reaction?
Total shock. They were completely caught off guard.
It's like they got a taste of their own medicine, you know?
The very system they were manipulating ended up bringing them down.
And you can bet the news of their arrest caused a lot of anger in the community.
Oh, absolutely. People felt betrayed, like their trust in the police had been completely shattered.
And it makes you wonder about everything the task force had done before, you know?
Right. Like, were any of their arrests legitimate?
Or was it all just a big lie?
That's the question that everyone was asking.
Did they really get those guns off the streets?
Or were they planting evidence?
Are those convictions based on actual crimes?
Or coerced confessions?
It's a scary thought.
And it created this huge legal mess,
Hundreds of cases had to be reviewed.
all because of the actions of these few corrupt cops.
So what happened to them? I mean, did they even try to fight the charges?
Oh yeah, they all pleaded not guilty.
Seriously.
They claimed they were just tough cops doing what they had to do.
In a tough city.
They said they were the good guys.
But the evidence was overwhelming.
The wiretaps, the hidden cameras, the victim testimonies.
It was pretty clear that they were guilty.
Their lawyers tried to argue that the FBI had entrapped them,
Like they were pressured into committing crimes.
but that didn't really fly.
The FBI had been building their case for years.
They were way too smart for that.
And eventually the pressure got to be too much.
Some of the officers started cooperating with the prosecution.
Hoping for lighter sentences.
It's amazing how quickly they turned on each other.
The guys who were supposed to be partners in crime.
Yeah, they were all looking out for themselves.
So what kind of sentences did they get?
It varied. Some got off relatively easy.
While others got decades behind bars.
It depended on how much they cooperated.
What about Sergeant Jenkins, the ringleader?
He maintained his innocence throughout the trial.
But the jury didn't buy it.
He got 25 years in federal prison.
25 years? That's a long time.
But is it enough?
I mean, how do you even begin to measure the damage he caused?
The lives he ruined.
The trust he betrayed.
It's a debate that continues to this day,
Some people think the sentences were too lenient.
while others believe that justice was served.
But one thing's for sure.
The Gun Trace Task Force scandal exposed a very dark side of the Baltimore Police Department,
It showed that corruption can exist even in the highest levels of law enforcement.
and it raised serious questions about the culture of policing.
So what happened after everything settled down?
Did the Baltimore PD make any changes?
I mean, they had to do something, right?
Yeah, they faced a lot of pressure to reform.
So what did they do?
They implemented new policies, increased oversight.
Anything else?
They launched initiatives to rebuild trust with the community.
But was it enough?
That's hard to say.
Some people believe that the changes were just superficial,
That the culture of corruption is still there.
while others see signs of progress.
They point to increased accountability and a greater focus on community policing,
It's a long road to recovery.
especially after such a major betrayal of trust.
It takes time and effort to rebuild those relationships.
And it requires a commitment from everyone involved.
The police, the community, the city leaders,
Everyone needs to work together.
to create a system that is fair and just.
And that holds everyone accountable.
You know, it's crazy to think that this whole thing started with that one little detail.
Yeah, that extra GPS tracker on Aaron Anderson's car.
Like a domino effect.
You pull on one tiny thread and the whole thing unravels.
Imagine if McDougal hadn't noticed that second tracker.
Who knows how long they would have gotten away with it.
It's a scary thought.
And it really highlights the importance of whistleblowers.
People who are willing to speak up even when it's dangerous.
Like Ivan Dates.
He put his own neck on the line to expose this corruption.
He knew it was the right thing to do.
And he didn't back down even when things got tough.
That takes a lot of courage.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this?
I think it's clear that we need more transparency and accountability in law enforcement.
We can't just trust that the system will police itself.
There need to be mechanisms in place to catch these bad actors.
And we need to create an environment where people feel safe reporting misconduct.
Without fear of retaliation.
Exactly. We have to protect the whistleblowers.
Because they're the ones who help keep the system honest.
And it's not just about catching the bad guys after the fact.
We need to address the root causes of police corruption.
Like inadequate training.
Lack of oversight.
A culture that sometimes prioritizes arrests over justice.
It's a complex issue with no easy solutions.
But the gun trace task force scandal is a wake-up call.
It shows us what can happen when we turn a blind eye to corruption.
And it reminds us that we all have a role to play in holding those in power accountable.
We can't just sit back and expect others to fix it.
This is our city, our community.
And we need to demand better.
This deep dive into the gun trace task force has been a real eye-opener.
It's a story about the dark side of power.
And the importance of fighting for justice.
Even when it's hard.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
We hope you learned something.
And that you'll continue to stay engaged with these important issues.
Because the fight for a more just world never ends.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive.
We'll see you next time.